Hello students, so welcome to lecture number 16 of instrumental methods of analysis, and in this today's lecture we will be discussing about the basic principle of flame photometry and various interferences observed in flame photometry. So, as you have already discussed that we have already studied that spectroscopy involves the interaction of the matter and the light, and based upon the interaction it can be like the absorption spectroscopy, emission spectroscopy or scattering spectroscopy. So, flame photometry actually comes under the emission spectroscopy. So, let us start with the introduction. Flame photometry is also known as a flame atomic emission spectroscopy and is actually based upon the measurement of intensity of the light emitted when a metal is introduced into the flame. So, this flame photometry, also known as atomic emission spectroscopy, is mainly used to determine the metals in the various different samples, and the wavelength of the color produced is actually that to tell us the nature of the element present in the sample. So, based upon it, if it is like qualitative analysis. So, we are just bothered or we just focused upon the what characteristic type of wavelength is produced, and the intensity of the light or the wavelength produced gave us the information for the quantitative analysis. So, therefore, flame photometry, by the flame photometry we can also know the presence or absence of any metal present in the sample, as well as we can also determine the quantity of that particular metal in any sample. So, in flame photometry actually the metal atoms are converted into the vapors. Now, the converting of metal into the vapor, that stage vaporization is actually caused by the flame. So, there are several methods available to cause the vaporization, and some are like classified as a flame evaporation method, vaporization method, and some are like known as a non flame methods, that mainly includes the plasma source, ICPs, etc. So, here we will focus our discussion around the flame. So, that is why it is called as a flame photometry. So, after converting into the vapor, they are thermally excited to the high energy level, and the thermal energy of the flame generally give us the sufficient amount of energy to the atoms that are present in the ground state to excite them into the higher energy state or the excited state. And as we all know that excited state is having a very short lifespan. So, any atom that has gone to the excited state has to come down to the ground state, and during that path, or means from the excited state coming back to the ground state, the amount of energy that was absorbed by the metal will be emitted, and that emission is actually observed and noticed by the instrument called as a flame photometer. So, therefore, in the flame photometry the excited state population is important and actually is observed and measured. So, this is a very important statement that can be kept in mind always, that for a flame emission spectroscopy the most important population is the excited state population. Whereas we will be discussing in the next lecture, upcoming lectures, another technique, and they will be focused over the ground state population. So, in this flame emission spectroscopy, the major focus is upon the determination of the excited state population, because if the higher excited state population is the larger, so better and the high emission will be observed by the instrument, and the specific wavelength emitted by the any element generally appear as a spectral line in either the UV or the visible region. So, in flame photometry, actually the sample is aspirated into the flame first of all, and the intensity of the characteristic radiation emitted by any particular element is generally correlated with its concentration in the sample. So, here is the basic principle of flame photometry, and on the one side we have enlisted the processes that are taking place. So, first step is the aspiration, then second step is the evaporation, vaporization, decomposition, excitation, and finally emission. So, it actually involves a series of 6 different steps. Then first is the aspiration step. So, aspiration is nothing, just the introduction of the sample into the flame in the form of a fine mist or the fine droplets, and this is mainly carried out by the various atomizers or the nebulizer component of any instrument in the form of the aerosol. So, this is the first step of aspiration, and aspiration, in this aspiration we introduce the solution of the sample into the flame in the form of the aerosol. Now, as these fine droplets of aerosol come in contact with the flame, and due to the temperature of the flame, the solvent generally becomes evaporated, and after the evaporation it goes to the vapor state. The salt will go to the vapor state, and that is the step number 2 and 3, which includes the evaporation as well as the vaporization. And as these metal salts are generally vaporized, then due to the absorption of the light energy from the flame, then thermal dissociation take place, that is the step number 4. And in this dissociation step, these individual atoms are actually produced, and those individual atoms that are produced as a result of the dissociation steps are actually then further excited to the high energy level by the flame temperature, and as it goes to the high energy level, then high energy is observed in the step number 5 and excitation is observed, and finally from the excited state it will return to the ground state with the emission of the light, and that is the final step number 6. So, in this final step, what emission or the light emitted by this sample is actually measured, and that will give us the information about its nature and its concentration. So, this is the basic principle of flame photometry that involves these series of 6 different steps. So, this is the explanation or the description of that scheme that we have already discussed, that where the small amount of sample is first of all placed in the beaker, then air, oxygen and combustible gases is generally fed into the atomizer under the controlled pressure, and this allows a thin spray of the solution to be introduced into the flame, and the solvent then evaporate and get dehydrated and further dissociate to the free gaseous atoms in the ground state. Some of such atoms absorb energy from the flame and are raised to the excited state and spend some little time in the excited state, then drop back to the ground state by emitting the light of the characteristic wavelength, which is generally detected by the detector system. So, this can be well understood by this picture. Here we have the ground state, its energy can be represented as a E1, and on the upper side we have the excited state whose energy can be represented as a E2, and the energy gap or the difference between these two E2 minus E1 is generally called as a delta E, that represents the difference of the energy between the ground state and the excited state. So, after gaining the energy from the flame, the atoms in the ground state move to the excited state, and when they come back to the ground state after deactivation, they emit the photons, and this emission has some characteristic wavelength that is actually we are going to estimate or the determine. So, this can well be understood with this equation that we know that delta E, the difference of the energy between the ground state and the excited state is generally is equal to the h nu, and where nu is the frequency, that can also be written as a c by lambda. So, we can clearly see that energy is like directly proportional to that frequency here, and it is inversely proportional to the wavelength. So, if the larger will be the gap between the ground state and the excited state, then high amount of energy will be like emitted. So, its frequency would be higher and its wavelength would be smaller. So, if the gap between these two levels E1 and E2 is smaller, then longer wavelength lights are generally emitted. So, we can clearly see that what type of wavelength is actually observed in this detector is generally depending upon the difference of the energies between the ground state and the excited state, that is E1 and E2. And as we have already discussed that in flame photometry we are like bothered or concerned about the excited state population, and that excited state population or ground state population is generally expressed by an expression called as a Boltzmann-Maxwell distribution. So, this Boltzmann-Maxwell distribution generally give us the idea of excited state and the ground state populations. Here the n star generally represents the population of the excited state, and n naught is generally is indicating the population of the ground state atoms. So, this is the ratio, actually that ratio n star upon n is giving you it is the ratio of the excited state population to the ground state population of the atom, and that is equal to delta E raised to power minus delta E upon k T. So, from this expression it is clear that this ratio of excited state population and the ground state population is actually directly proportional to the temperature. So, as we increase the temperature, so the atoms in the excited state population generally increases. So, if more number of atoms would be present in the excited state, so we are definitely going to observe the stronger intensity of the emitted light. So, better would be the emission. So, from this Boltzmann distribution, the fraction of the atoms excited depend upon the temperature of the flame. And the temperature of the flame is generally controlled by varying the ratio of the fuel and the oxidant present can be used. So, as we know that to burn a flame we need a fuel as well as the oxidant. So, fuel and oxidant, by changing the ratio and the composition of the fuel and the oxidants, different temperatures can be achieved. So, if like in this table, if you look into the table, we have one column indicating the fuel, then second column is representing the oxidant, and third column is giving you the information about the approximate temperature that can be achieved with this particular combination. So, hydrogen and oxygen generally type of flames will give you the 2800 degrees Celsius temperature, but instead of oxygen if we use the air, so temperature is reduced to 2100, and instead of using even by changing the oxidant to the argon gas, so it is even more less temperature 1600. So, instead of hydrogen if we use acetylene or propane as a fuel, so again by changing the oxidants like oxygen, air or nitrous oxide, we can achieve a different type of temperature. So, from this table you can clearly see that acetylene flames generally have a higher temperature when they are burnt in presence of, when it is burnt in presence of either pure oxygen or in nitrous oxide. So, acetylene nitrous oxide or acetylene oxygen flames generally give you the higher temperature around 3000 degree Celsius temperature. So, but there is one limitation that flame provide a limited amount of energy. So, it cannot it is not able to cause the excitation to all the atoms or the elements present in the periodic table due to the different structure or electronic configuration or atomic arrangements. So, therefore, flame is particularly useful for the determination of group 1 and group 2 metals, which generally has or also known as alkali metals and alkaline earth metal. So, flame photometry is particularly useful for the determination of alkali metals and alkaline earth metals and their salts. So, it mainly includes like sodium, potassium, calcium, lithium, cesium, etc. So, these are the some examples that can easily be detected or identified by using this flame photometry technique. And but higher temperature techniques like non-flame methods, suppose like plasma source ICP, can give you the broader range of the elements that can be detected by using this atomic emission spectroscopy. But such high energy source are not suitable for group 1 and group 2 metals, because that they may cause the ionization. So, therefore, whenever you are designing your experiment or the determinations, you should always keep in mind that low temperatures are not sufficient to cause the excitation, and hence emission would be suppressed, and high temperature generally leads to the ionization. So, therefore, you should choose a temperature suitable that upon that or on that temperature study can be carried out, that you generally need a maximum emission with the minimum ionization. Now, moving on to the second part, that is the interferences. So, as we have discussed in the principle that whenever we are like aspirating the sample solution into the flame, so it generally causes the excitation by the absorption of the thermal energy, and that excitation pushes the ground state atom to the excited state, where they spend some little time and then come back to the ground state by the emission of the light. Now, during this whole process there can be the several factors that may affect the intensity of that emitted light that is reaching to the detector. So, therefore, interferences are such factors that affect the flame emission of any particular given element and generally lead to the interference with the determination of the concentration of that particular given element. So, these are the factors that interferes with the determination, and that may contribute for the improper estimation or the poor determination and the insufficient you can say the results, improper results. So, broadly if we classify, the interferences can be classified into the spectral interferences and the chemical interferences. So, further they are having a subclasses also. So, we will discuss them one by one, and to start with the first we will discuss the about the spectral interferences. So, spectral interferences mainly arises when the line emission of the element which is under investigation and those of the interfering substance are of a similar wavelength or very near to each other. So, means if your sample has some kind of impurity and its emission line spectra, its emission wavelength is quite near to the wavelength of the sample that is under investigation. So, it may confuse the readers that and definitely may leads to the improper justification and the poor interpretation of the results. Just to take an example, suppose we have a iron and we have a copper. So, iron has a spectra around at 324.73 nanometer, whereas copper absorbs at or show emission at 324.75 nanometers. So, if we look both these wavelengths, they are generally have a variation after the decimal value. So, if you are having a like a spectrometer having a like a poor wavelength selector, poor dispersion component, so that would not be able to separate these two peaks from each other, and you would definitely get the single signal. So, therefore, this can be confused. So, if some copper impurities are present in the iron, so that will be overlooked. So, what we can do? So, there are two approaches that can be used to rectify this kind of interferences or to improve our results. One is the extraction. So, we can remove the impurity if we are aware that we may have some particular type of impurity. So, that can be removed by the chemical extraction method, chemical or physical extraction method, or by some ion exchange method. And if we are not aware and if we cannot separate, so it would be better to use the to increase the resolution power of the instrument. So, for that we can improve the dispersion element. So, suppose if you are using the prism, so instead of prisms you can replace the prism with the grating. So, results would be improved. After this, the second type is the chemical interferences. So, these are the like interferences that generally arises due to the chemical interactions. So, it has several subtypes also, and first one is the cation interferences. So, these cation interferences are mainly observed due to the mutual interaction of the different type of cations present in the sample solution. Like for example, aluminum generally interfere with the calcium and the magnesium. So, like if you are going for the determination of the calcium or the magnesium, and if aluminum is present as an impurity, so it would definitely impair your results. So, this calcium aluminum interference arises from the formation of a complex called as a calcium aluminate, and this can be overcome by working at the high temperature. So, if aluminum calcium interactions are observed, so you can slightly increase the temperature of the flame. You can increase the temperature by which this complex called as a calcium aluminate will break down, and the calcium would be now available in the free state. So, its emission would be observed in a better manner. Then another type of chemical interference is the oxide formation interferences. In these oxide formations, it arises due to the formation of the stable metal oxides in presence of oxygen. And now the oxygen is we are already we know that we are supplying the oxygen via this instrument, via the flame, to burn the flame. So, therefore, we cannot avoid the oxygen. So, like aluminum oxide. So, if you are going for the determination of aluminum, and due to the oxygen present in the flame, it may react with the oxygen and can form a aluminum oxide. So, this can also be like improved or corrected by making your investigations at higher temperatures. So, at high temperature, this oxides that are formed can be dissociated and metal can be freed. Then another third type of interference is the cation anion interferences. So, in this case the certain anions like oxalates, phosphates, sulfates in the solution can interact with the metal cation present in the solution, sample solution. So, like for example, calcium in presence of a phosphate forms a stable compound, calcium phosphate, and which does not decompose easily, and this results in the production of the lesser free atoms. And next is the ionization interferences. Now, ionization interferences are the results of excitation at higher temperatures. So, as we discussed earlier that very high temperatures, the instead of the excitation, atoms undergo ionization by the removal of the electron, and that generally give you the incorrect results, because suppose we are having a neutral sodium metal, and upon after the ionization removal of the electron, it make a cation. Now, the neutral sodium and the sodium cation both can have a different emission spectrum, and therefore, we are going to determine the concentration of the sodium atoms, but due to the ionization and conversion of a sodium into its ionic state or ionic form, the neutral sodium concentration from the solution decreases, and this may lead to the improper results. So, because this sodium cation generally possesses its own emission spectrum and is different from the atomic spectrum of the neutral sodium atom. So, therefore, we should always keep in mind the thing that temperature should be controlled very carefully. If temperature is lesser, then it may not cause the excitation to the ground state atoms, but if it is larger than the expected, so it may cause the ionization. So, both situations may lead to the poor results. So, this is the general summarization of the correction, that what approaches you can use to overcome the interferences. So, first is the correction use of the better resolving component for the better resolution. This is appropriate in case of spectral interferences. Mechanical separation, solvent extraction method, ion exchange methods, so can also be applied to separate the interfering impurity. Then use of high temperature flames. High temperature flames are beneficial when cation interactions are there, or when some metal oxide formations are there. Instead, we can also use the releasing agents. So, releasing agents generally are such compounds which themselves react with the impurity, and it make your sample or analyte free. Like for example, if this is a reaction of Mx plus R will give you the Rx plus M. So, this releasing agent generally react with the impurity and free the metal atom. So, this is to take example, so calcium in presence of phosphate, lanthanum or strontium chloride is added. So, when calcium and phosphates are interacting with each other, so lanthanum and strontium can be added as a releasing agent. Then low temperature flames can also be used, and ionization can also be done or improved by suppressed by the ionization suppressants. So, ionization suppressants can be like potassium in the determination of calcium, barium or strontium. So, these are the references that can be referred by you for further studies. Thank you very much.